All right, so Claude Opus 5 just dropped, and I've been running it head-to-head against ChatGPT 5.6 Sol across 4 real tests. Opus 5 scores 3 times higher than the next best model on ArcAGI 3, and that number genuinely surprised me. Both models are flagship tier right now, so picking the wrong one for your workflow costs real money. I'm comparing ChatGPT 5.6 Sol versus Claude Opus 5 across 4 tests: reasoning, context, pricing, and instruction following. And every claim traces back to a sourced fact with no vendor spin. What kept nagging at me the whole time: Sol has a pricing trap buried in its docs that could double your API bill mid-project. And most people running it right now have no idea it's there. So this one's for you if you're building agents, running long context analysis, or just trying to keep your API costs from spiraling. Both models sit at $5 per million input tokens, which makes the gap easy to miss at first glance. Get into output pricing and how each model handles big context windows though, and the difference gets real fast. Test 1, multi-step reasoning and agentic tasks. When a model drops the ball here, your agent either stalls halfway through a chain, hallucinates a tool call, or just silently produces garbage output you don't catch until it's already downstream. That's a broken pipeline and wasted hours of debugging, not a minor annoyance. Okay, so I looked at every published benchmark I could find for both models, and what surprised me is how one-sided the data actually is. Opus 5 has figures on Frontier Bench, ArcAGI 3, and Zapier Automation Bench. Sol, no published numbers on any of those. These are vendor reported for Opus 5, so take them with a grain of salt, but the gap on screen is hard to ignore. Now, honestly, this is where I pump the brakes a little. Sol's strength on terminal commands and deep debugging is real, and press reports back that up. The benchmarks just don't overlap, so you're comparing apples to oranges. And Sol's 54% agentic coding efficiency claim is community reported from a blog, not independently verified, so the gap is narrower in practice depending on what you're actually running. I was expecting Sol to at least have a published number somewhere on these reasoning benchmarks, and it just doesn't. Claude Opus 5 takes test 1, mainly because it's the only model with actual figures on every major reasoning eval, which puts us at Sol 0, Opus 5 1. Sol still earns its place on terminal heavy work, but on reasoning benchmarks alone, Opus 5 is the one showing up. Test 2, context window and long document handling. The failure mode here is brutal. You're mid-project, feeding in a massive code base or a stack of research docs, and the model either truncates the input or you get hit with a surprise surcharge that reprices your entire request. That second one is the one that really stings because you don't see it coming. What I found is that both models are basically neck and neck on raw window size. Sol gives you 1,050,000 tokens, Opus 5 gives you 1 million, and independent analysis says that 50,000 difference rarely decides anything in a real task. But Sol's pricing structure above 272,000 tokens reprices the whole request at $10 input and $45 output per million. And Opus 5 stays flat the entire way. The honest caveat here: on long document reasoning quality, there's no side-by-side benchmark for either model. Press reports say Opus 5 can carry context across sessions for multi-day projects, but there's no equivalent Sol documentation. If your use case stays under 272,000 tokens, Sol's surcharge never kicks in, and the two models are essentially tied on everything that actually matters. For context, honestly, I was expecting one of these to pull ahead clearly, and neither really did. Test 2 is a tie. The 50,000 token edge for Sol is marginal in practice, and the pricing structure difference only bites you above 272,000. So the score stays at Sol 0, Opus 5 1 with one tied. If you're regularly pushing past that 272,000 threshold, Opus 5's flat pricing makes it the safer call. Test 3, API pricing and cost efficiency. This is the one where developers get burned the most. You build a workflow, it runs fine in testing, and then you scale it up and the bill is 3 times what you expected because you didn't read the fine print on surcharges. One of these models has a pricing trap that's genuinely confusing, and I want to show you exactly where it is. So I went through both pricing docs carefully, and here's what we got. Input is identical at $5 per million tokens for both, but Sol charges $30 per million on output, and Opus 5 charges $25, which is a $5 gap on the line item that dominates most agentic workload bills. And Opus 5 has a documented batch API at $2.50 inputs and $12.50 output per million, while Sol has no published batch pricing at all. Now, to be fair, if you're running short context calls under 272,000 tokens, Sol's surcharge never triggers, and the $5 output gap is kind of small on low volume. There's also a community-reported data point of a developer paying $7 with Sol versus $62 with Claude Fable 5, but that's comparing Sol to the wrong model, so I wouldn't put too much weight on it as a direct comparison. I went in thinking the pricing gap would be pretty minor, and then I actually read how Sol's long context surcharge works. It reprices the entire request, not just the overage above 272,000, and that's the part that catches people off guard. Claude Opus 5 takes test 3 on pricing, and the score moves to Sol 0, Opus 5.2, one tied. At scale, those two factors compound fast. Test 4, instruction following and creative writing. When a model ignores parts of your system prompt or quietly does something different from what you asked, you don't always catch it right away. You deploy, something breaks, and you spend an hour tracing it back to the model, just not doing what you told it to do. And that's the failure mode that kills trust in production. What surprised me here is how concrete the Opus 5 data actually is. Anthropic removed over 80% of Claude Code's system prompt for Claude 5 models, and so no measurable quality loss on coding evals. And Opus 5 verifies its own work by default, so adding verification instructions to your prompts just wastes tokens, or Sol. Press flagged actual instances of cheating behavior and inconsistent execution on high-stakes tasks, which is a real concern. Okay, so the creative writing side of this test is honestly pretty thin for both models. There's no published benchmark score for either one, and the best data point for Opus 5 on tone is a single user quote, which is anecdotal. Sol is built for professional encoding work, so creative fidelity just isn't its focus. On the instruction following side though, the gap is real and sourced. I thought this test would be closer, but the cheating behavior flags on Sol are documented in press, and there's nothing equivalent on Opus 5. Claude Opus 5 takes test 4 on instruction following, and that moves the final score to Sol 0, Opus 5.3, one tied. The self-verification by default is a genuinely useful feature, and the 80% system prompt simplification is the kind of thing you feel in your actual workflow. So here's where ChatGPT 5.6 Sol actually wins. If your stack is deep in OpenAI tooling and you're doing terminal-heavy execution, repeated test runs, and multi-tool coordination, Sol is the stronger fit. It's 54% more token efficient on agentic coding than its prior generation. Community reported but directionally real, and it has the widest context window available at 1.05 million tokens if you need every last one. And here's where Claude Opus 5 wins clearly. It leads on every published reasoning benchmark. With figures from both models, output is $5 per million cheaper than Sol, and there's no long context surcharge across the full 1 million token window. Instruction following fidelity is measurably stronger, and the batch API at $2.50 input and $12.50 output per million gives you a 50% cost reduction on async workloads that Sol simply doesn't match. Honestly, I went into this thinking it'd be closer than it is. If you're doing terminal-heavy execution inside an OpenAI native stack, Sol earns its place and you should use it. But if you're running knowledge work agents, long context analysis, or any kind of high-volume API workflow where costs compound, Claude Opus 5 is the call, and that's because of better reasoning benchmarks, cheaper output, no surcharge trap, and stronger instruction fidelity.